Hey guys, we're working on 6.2, and this is specifically part A. It's a little bit of review. 6.2 is piecewise functions, which, as you can note in the folder, it says piecewise functions, and we'll talk more about what those are going to look like in a second. But we need to pull an old skill back that we once had. It's not too hard, so it'll be pretty easy. We're just going to evaluate functions. So we've got three functions here. We've got f of x equals 2x, g of x is 4x squared minus 1, and h of x is the third root of x plus 1, which should also be said as the cube root of x plus 1. So, our first example, find g of negative 2. So we know g of x is 4x squared minus 1. So I'm just going to copy that over. So gx squared, or g of x is 4x squared minus 1. And remember, this is not g times x. This is pronounced as g of x. And it's one unit. And it kind of takes the place of y. I like it better in function notation, which is what this is, because this says our input value. So we know our input value for g of negative 2 is negative 2. So instead of writing x, if you notice the notation, instead of writing x, I need to write negative 2. And what we do to one side of the equation, we always do to the other. So we're going to substitute in negative 2 in for x. So 4 times negative 2 squared minus 1, 4 times negative 2 squared minus 1. Alright, and then we're just going to simplify this side. We're going to leave this g of negative 2 by itself. It's just going to say g of negative 2. Think about our order of operations. Exponents are going to come first. Negative 2 squared is negative 2 times negative 2, which is positive 4. So then we have copy down the 4 in the front for multiplication and minus 1. So subtraction. So we've got 4 times 4 minus 1, which says, let's do our multiplication first. G of negative 2 is 16 minus 1, which she can say g of negative 2 is 15. So if we think about this in terms of our domain and range, for our g function, our domain is negative 2, and our range value for that domain is 15. A little bit of review from 6.1. Okay, so let's look at example 2. Example 2 says f of negative 3 plus g of 4. So think about these guys. Remember, this is not f times negative 3 and g times negative 4. This is f of negative 3, which says we have to evaluate this plus g of 4, which says we have to evaluate this before we can add them together. This is not some weird fg of negative 7 or 1 or however you kind of try to combine those. Figure out each of these individually, determine those solutions first and evaluate them, and then afterwards just add them together like it says a plus sign in the middle. Okay, so f of negative 3 is 2 times negative 3, because that's what f is. And then we're going to add the g part, which is 4 times 4 squared minus 1. And remember, we need to take care of doing each of these individual parts first. Take care of the whole f part first and the whole g part first, and then add them together. We've got to evaluate those first. So 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. So that's all simplified. 4 squared is 16. 4 times 4 is 16. Times 4 is 64. Minus 1 is 63. So 4 squared is 16. Times 4, 64. Minus 1 is 63. And now that I have individual numbers for each of these, I'm just going to add them together. So negative 6 plus 63. Let's count backwards. 57. So we could say that f of negative 3 plus g of 4 equals 57. And that's my final answer. And it doesn't really have one input and one output. It says if you have an input of negative 3, your output is negative 6. Input of 4, output is 63. And when you combine your outputs, you get 57 total. Okay, last one. We have a 2h of 7. And remember that this whole thing is one function. This is h of 7. So we need to take care of doing the h of 7 part first before we can multiply. Just like up here, we evaluated each of these individual functions before we add them together. We're going to do the same thing down here, except with just multiplication. So we can rewrite this as 2. H is the third root. X, in this case, is 7. Our input value is 7 plus 1. And I put these parentheses around here just to remind myself to, hey, do all of this h stuff first before I try multiplying anything by 2. So we get 2. Okay, the third root of 7 plus 1 is the third root of 7 plus 1 gives us 8. And then we need to take the third root of 8. So what multiplies by itself 3 times to be 8? Well, see, 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8. Okay, so the third root of 8 is just 2. So we can say 2 times 2, which gives us plain old, now that we've evaluated h of 7, we get 4. If you wanted to do all this other work off to the side and not combine these, that's fine. You could also find h of 7 over here and say, hey, that's the third root of 7 plus 1, which I know that's still 8, which I know that's still 2, and then say, oh, okay, and then I'm going to say 2h of 7 is going to be 2 times 2, and that's 4. And that's really how you get there is neither here nor there. But you've got to take care of simplifying this evaluation part first. So 2h of 7 is equal to just 4. Alright, this should be pretty easy practice for you guys today. Make sure you get your practice worksheet. I will have the answers on the board, so don't forget, go ahead and check them when you're done to make sure that you did everything correctly. Alright, let's get to work.